a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. 5 stereotypes that define who you are and where you stand in this prison that we call high school. Think back to your high school years. What was your role in high school? Where did you stand in the hierarchy of social structure? What happens when these 5 stereotypes are sentenced to spend a Saturday detention session together at Shermer High School? After watching John Hughes' The Breakfast Club, Matt, Luke, Erin, Renee, and I, Devin, have decided that this film provides a great example of the way that small but diverse groups can overcome personal and interpersonal obstacles in order to become a cohesive and productive unit. Each member of the group enters the Shermer High School library on Saturday morning with different expectations and opinions about the other students. They all have very specific stereotypes through which their peers view them. Initially, they are somewhat strangers to each other and remain completely isolated from one another, struggling to communicate due to their judgments and preconceptions about each other. As time goes on, they slowly begin to uncover similarities. Eventually, they are brought together through the common goal of overcoming their boredom and bond over their shared contempt for the adult society. After reading our text and analyzing the film based on the concepts from the text, we were able to elicit very important themes regarding small groups, interaction, and development. Throughout this speech, we will be using quotes and clips taken directly from the film and incorporate them with the concepts and terms that we have taken directly from the text. We will begin by discussing the way that these status of the high school students play out, and then explain how their roles within the group affect their communication and how cohesiveness develops within the group. Matt will begin by describing the way that status plays out in these high school students.
When the students first enter the detention, they acknowledge that their pre-existing status is already in play. As Brian mentions that in the letter that he is assigned from Principal Vernon, he says, "You see us how you want to see us." He's referring to the preconceived notions that the social hierarchy of the school stamps on these students. According to our text, status refers to the relative importance, prestige, or power of a member within a group. In this movie, the high status members of the group are Claire and Andrew. This is so because during the school week, they are considered popular, cool, and are oftentimes looked up to. Brian would be considered of middling status. This is because although he is a nerd, he is very smart and his intellect garners him some respect from his peers. This is evidenced when the students ask him for his assistance in writing the letter. The low status members of the group would be John Bender and Allison. They are considered the social bottom feeders or outcasts of the social hierarchy of the high school. They are oftentimes ignored or looked over, and this is reflected as they walk into the detention. There is bickering immediately when they walk into the detention between John Bender and Claire and Andrew. Claire and Andrew side with each other, mainly due to their shared high status. Brian will interject frequently, but is oftentimes told to be quiet or stay out of it. And Allison only contributes with noises, and she doesn't really say anything in particular. As the detention progresses, the normal social hierarchy is eventually inversed. Bender begins to garner a little bit more respect and higher status due to his expertise in Saturday detentions, given that he has been there many times before. As someone with high status or someone who is gaining status within the group, he begins to make and break social norms, and eventually the students begin to follow him. Some examples of this are when Bender decides that he's going to leave the library where the detention is being held, and he is going to go to his locker. The students follow him, and eventually Brian asks, "Why are we following him?" to which students have no answer. This is an indication of his leadership and his gaining respect within the group. Another example is when Bender takes the screw out of the door so that the Principal Vernon cannot keep it shut. This is a trick that he learned because he's been in detention many times before, and the students actually cover for him instead of selling him down the river as they would have done in the beginning of the movie. And this is going to be shown in the video clip we're going to show now.
We'll all get up. It'll be anarchy. It's out of my hands. That's very clever, sir. But what if there's a fire? I think violating fire codes and endangering the lives of children would be unwise at this juncture in your career, sir.
All right, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get out of here, for God's sake. What's the matter with you? Come on!
Well, you know the school comes equipped with fire exits at either end of the library. Show Dick some respect.
Let's go. Get back in your seat. I expected a little more from a varsity letter. You're not fooling anybody, Bender. The next screw that falls out is going to be you. What was that?
Eat my shorts.
You just bought yourself another Saturday, mister.
Ah, Christ.
You just bought one more right there.
Well, I'm free the Saturday after that. Beyond that, I'm gonna have to check my calendar.
Because it's going to be filled. We'll keep going. You want another one? Say the word. Just say the word. Instead of going to prison, you'll come here. Are you through?
No.
I'm doing society a favor.
So?
That's another one right now. I've got you for the rest of your natural born life if you don't watch your step. You want another one?
Yes.
You got it. You got another one right there. That's another one, pal.
Cut it out!
You through?
Not even close.
But good. You got one more right there.
You really think I give a shit?
Another. You through?
That 7 Clinton when we first came in, you asked us to run in here. Was it Barry Manlin there that he raided his closet?
Now it's 8. You stay out of it.
See if we start at 7.
Shut up, Pee-wee.
So this video clip demonstrates that Bender is obviously gaining a little bit more respect with his peers, and they're giving him a little bit of a higher status. Normally, they would not have laughed at any of his jokes or anything he said, and Claire wouldn't have cared whether or not he got in trouble, but she actually went as far as to tell him to cut it out so that he wouldn't get any more trouble. And now Luke will talk about the roles within the group.
Thanks, Matt. So, as he said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific roles that the group members take on and how those roles affect the way communication develops within the group. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are a few important terms and concepts to keep in mind for the rest of our talk. Then the specific types of roles that the individual group members take on, how those roles differ from what we'd expect based on the social status that Matt discussed, and finally, how those roles govern who's comfortable breaking out of the norms of the group, making decisions, and taking on leadership roles. So role is defined as a pattern of behavior or a composite of an individual's actions or behaviors. All the roles that we'll be discussing in this talk are informal as opposed to formal roles, meaning that they're determined by an individual's behaviors and the way the group responds to those behaviors, rather than an explicit definition or consensus arrived at by the group. Behavior is simply an individual's actions, both verbal and nonverbal, and behavior function refers to the way the group responds to those actions. A final term to keep in mind would be structuration, which simply refers to the idea that a group is constantly changing and evolving as communication develops within the group. And that'll be especially important to keep in mind when Aaron discusses the way cohesion will develop within the group. So now I'll discuss the specific roles that the characters in the movie take on. Starting with Claire, she's one of the most active but also one of the most passive members of the group. She really isn't comfortable expressing her own original ideas or opinions unless she's prompted by another member of the group. But she also acts as a harmonizer, because when conflict arises between, for instance, Mr. Vernon and Bender, or Bender and Andrew, as we'll see later, she'll eventually step in and try to ease the tension that's going on in that situation and resolve those conflicts. Bender is the initiator of the group. He's the one that's most comfortable breaking out of the norms, initiating action, taking on leadership roles. But he's also an information seeker. He is constantly trying to pry information out of the other members, especially personal information, such as when he's pestering Claire to try to tell the rest of the group members whether or not she's a virgin. Andrew is one of the most unwilling members of the group, but he's also the most aggressive. So when Bender starts antagonizing him, he's quick to jump to threats of violence and actually ends up physically taking down Bender at one point with a wrestling move. But he's also a supportive member with respect to weaker members like Brian and Claire. So when Bender is antagonizing them, he'll jump in and try to act as a gatekeeper, giving them a voice and allowing them to be heard within the group. Allison is by far the most introverted member of the group and really sort of remains disengaged from the rest of the group members for the majority of the movie. Eventually she'll become more of a dramatizer when she admits to the group that she's a pathological liar and ends up coming up with these elaborate stories about her sex life to try to elicit a similar response from the rest of the group members. And finally, Brian is one of the most shy members, but you wouldn't actually call him introverted, because it turns out that in terms of confidence expressing his own opinions and original ideas, he's one of the members at the forefront, especially because his opinions aren't very popular among the group. Most of them, as you saw, have to do with following the rules and keeping order within the group. So how are these roles different from what we might expect based on the social hierarchy that we discussed in the first part? Well, as Matt suggested, the most dramatic reversal is Bender's role. He goes from being one of the members with the lowest social status during the school week to the member with the highest leadership role and power within the context of detention due to his experience in detention. Claire experiences a loss of power, a loss of value, because during the week, she has the highest social status out of any member of the group, but she's highly inexperienced in the context of detention, especially as compared to Bender. So she loses a lot of her power in that sense, and is sort of forced to take on the role of a follower. And Brian's value and power is sort of increased by the context of detention, because the members view him as one of the most intelligent members of the group. So in that sense, he's afforded a certain amount of respect that the other members really don't afford each other. So now we're going to play a short video clip that is a good portrayal of not only the roles, but the way the roles affect the way interaction plays out in the group. And this is a scene where Bender decides to get up and smoke, and the other members follow him, in some cases, kind of reluctantly.
I do it to stay sharp.
So, hey, kijk van mijn doelwit.
Go, wasteoid. Not gonna blaze up in here.
Everybody make sure their cell phones are off. I've heard twos.
So again, we see Bender is the first one to initiate action. So not only is he breaking the rules set by Mr. Vernon, but he's going against the norms that the individuals in the group have as non-smokers. We see Claire taking on the role of a follower again, only making the decision to go smoke once Bender leads the way. Brian, we see, is more confident making his decisions due to his perceived intelligence in the group. And the respect that the group members have for him is also shown in the fact that Andrew, who would usually be a trendsetter and a leader in his social setting, only goes to smoke after Brian decides to do so as well. And again, we see Allison maintaining her role as the highly introverted member who's remaining disengaged with the other members of the group. So in summary, what we have in the Breakfast Club is a very diverse group of individuals coming from a wide variety of social statuses, and they're forced into this different context of detention, and we see this reshuffling of roles that in some cases is, such as in Bender's case, is quite dramatic from the roles that they take on outside of this context. So now Aaron's going to discuss a little bit about how cohesion is developed in the group throughout the rest of the movie.
Okay, so in the Breakfast Club, we see this kind of incredible transformation where they go from this group of students who has never met before and seems nothing alike to this very diverse but yet cohesive group. And cohesiveness develops in this movie through the development of group culture, through the establishment of norms and rules, and as they follow the phases of group socialization. So when they're first dropped off for detention, this is called the antecedent phase, and that's where we start meeting all the different members of the group, and we see their individual characteristics that are eventually going to affect how they contribute and respond to and in the group. Then we move on to the anticipatory phase, and this is where the members are forming expectations and ideas about the group and its members. And then these expectations are going to shape the upcoming interactions. Now, since the students are required to be in detention for 8 hours, and they pretty much have nothing else to do but to talk to each other, cohesiveness is almost forced to occur at some point. As they begin to interact, they enter the encounter phase. And this is where the expectations that they had previously made about the group and its members finally meet the reality of the situation. So while they still definitely have their differences and they don't quite get along just yet, they decide they unite to rise against a common enemy in Mr. Vernon, who's the teacher who's keeping them there. And they start to form a collective identity, as Bender refers to the group as we, instead of just talking about everybody individually. And this is also supported when, as Matt mentioned earlier, when he takes the screw out of the door, no one gives Bender up, they all cover for him. And everyone is fully integrated in the assimilation phase. And this is where most of the rules and norms have already been established. Now, Mr. Vernon has clearly stated rules like no moving around and you can't sleep and no foul play. But the students unite and they reject these rules and they put their own norms into effect. And some of the norms that they have are challenging authority, speaking your mind, and full disclosure, as I'll talk about in a minute. Also in this phase, they disclose a lot of personal information, and then through that, they discover that they have a lot of common interests and struggles. They all finally open up after they smoke pot together, where this is out of a lot of the students' comfort zone at first, but at the end of it, they are all more comfortable with each other. And this is also where Allison first makes her appearance to be cohesive with the group. So here's a video clip showing after they have smoked pot.
You're allowed to You're allowed to No! Yeah, you are.
this scene, clearly they have formed some cohesiveness there, but they continue to reveal more information about themselves. Allison lies to get Claire to reveal her virginity, like we mentioned before. And when it's discovered that Allison is a compulsive liar, Claire calls her bizarre, in which Andrew retorts that they're all bizarre in their own way. And this sort of reinforces the group culture and the cohesiveness that they had already established. And then they continue to talk about other personal things, like their relationship with their parents. And they discover, especially Bender and Andrew, that even though they don't seem very similar, they have a lot of similar experiences. And then this is the video clip that shows that.
That doesn't make it.
Makes it.
Okay, fine, but that doesn't make it any less bizarre.
What's bizarre? I mean, we're all pretty bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it, that's all.
How are you bizarre? Can't think for himself.
She's right. Do you guys know what I did to get in here? I taped Larry Lester's buds together.
That was you?
Yeah, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you know how hairy it is, right? Well, when they pulled the tape off, most of his hair came off and some skin too.
Oh my God.
And the bizarre thing is that I did it for my old man. You know, sometimes I wish my knee would give. And I wouldn't be able to wrestle anymore. He could forget all about me.
I think your old man and my old man should get together and go bowling.
So now, as they start leaving detention, they enter the exit phase of group socialization. And the students begin to wonder what's going to happen come Monday, where their social statuses will return to normal. But they decide to try to stay together and remain the cohesive unit that they named the Breakfast Club. And now, since we covered various group dynamics, I'm going to pass it off to Renee, who's going to review what we talked about today.
Thus, in the end, we see these 5 different individuals being able to come together effectively and work as a group. One of the main points that we really focused on is status. We see that upon meeting, there's like an obvious tension between them, and it really stems from the fact that they come in with these statuses ascribed to them based on who they hang out with in high school. We see that there's in the conflicts, we see that there's a definite division in the group. We see a high status versus low status members, but due to the change in the context, aka they're in detention and not in the normal class, we see that status also changed. Sorry. And we see that Bender soon becomes a high status member. Another point that we focus on is how roles affect communication. As Luke mentioned, these roles that they inhabit are informal, and it's basically because of their attitudes and behaviors. We see that with each character that they behave in both a positive and a negative way that affects their communication. However, as they interact more, we see that the roles change and their attitude also changes because they become more positive. And as a result, their communication also benefits. Lastly, we see how cohesiveness develops. We see that the key contributors are time, because they're spending so much time in detention. And we also see that they also share a feeling of boredom. We also see that they all dislike Mr. Vernon as the authority figure. And through their interaction, we see them become more open to disclose more information about themselves. And as a result, we see that they're more similar than they came out thinking they were going to be. And as a result, we see them leave, learning more about each other and becoming a more cohesive group. Finally, we're left to ponder what will become of this group when it comes Monday. Will they go to their old group and forget about detention, or will they learn how to integrate the new group into their old one? Regardless of that, we learn that they come out having a better understanding of themselves and each other. And as Brian writes in the essay,
Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice an entire Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy for making us write an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us how you want to see us, in the simplest terms and the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain,
An athlete.
In a basket case.
a princess.
And a criminal.
Does that answer your question? Sincerely, the Breakfast Club.